Some breakups don't just hurt, they shake your identity. You don't just miss the person, you miss who you were when you believed the pain meant love. And the scariest part? You know they weren't good for you, yet letting go feels harder than staying broken. If you've ever said, I don't know why I can't move on, this isn't weakness. This is a trauma bond, and today we're breaking it. T-Roma bonds are one of the most misunderstood experiences in human relationships. They don't feel like abuse, neglect, or manipulation at first. They feel like love, intensity, and connection. It starts subtly, often in moments of extreme highs and lows. You feel euphoria when they are affectionate and a deep ache when they withdraw. This emotional pendulum creates a neurological loop in your brain, a cycle of reward and withdrawal that your mind begins to mistake for passion. Over time, the inconsistency itself becomes addictive. You start to believe that if you endure the pain, you will eventually be rewarded with love, attention, or validation. And so you stay even when you know deep down that something is fundamentally wrong. Trauma bonds are not about weakness. They are about the body and mind adapting to patterns of emotional chaos, learning to survive in instability, and mistaking survival for intimacy. Trauma bonds often form in relationships where emotional needs are inconsistently met. One moment, your partner may be loving, attentive, and charming, making you feel like the most cherished person in the world. The next moment, they might withdraw, criticize, or emotionally distance themselves, leaving you anxious, confused, and desperate for reassurance. This unpredictability triggers the brain's reward system, releasing dopamine and adrenaline, making the highs feel intoxicating and the lows feel unbearable. It is this neurological pattern that creates the illusion of love. You may rationalize the pain, telling yourself that every argument, every withdrawal, or every cold gesture is a test, a challenge, or a lesson in patience. You convince yourself that if you love harder, give more, or try longer, the relationship will finally stabilize. But the cycle repeats, often intensifying over time until the trauma bond is fully entrenched. What makes trauma bonds particularly painful is the internal conflict they create. Part of you knows that the relationship is toxic, that your emotional needs are not being met, that the highs are fleeting and the lows are damaging. Yet another part of you clings desperately to the hope, the fantasy, or the fleeting moments of joy that occasionally pierce through the chaos. This duality generates self-blame, confusion, and a constant questioning of your own judgment. You may wonder why you can't leave, why you crave someone who hurts you, or why the thought of losing them feels unbearable, even when the relationship has caused repeated pain. Trauma bonds are rooted in a deep-seated desire for connection and love, but they are also reinforced by patterns of early attachment, past abandonment, and learned survival strategies that make emotional instability feel familiar, almost comforting in a paradoxical way. The complexity of trauma bonds lies in how they hijack your emotional system, convincing you that your emotional turmoil is proof of love. They teach you that extreme highs and crushing lows are what passionate relationships are supposed to feel like, creating a distorted view of intimacy. The emotional dependency that develops can be powerful and disorienting, making it difficult to see the relationship clearly or to trust your own perception. You may find yourself returning repeatedly, even after conscious decisions to leave, because the bond has rewired your brain to chase emotional intensity over stability. Recognizing a trauma bond requires honest self-reflection, the courage to confront patterns of emotional dependence, and the willingness to separate genuine love from addictive chaos. Breakups often feel far more painful than the relationship itself ever did. At first glance, this seems illogical. After all, the relationship brought both joy and pain, yet the heartbreak after its end seems sharper, deeper, almost unbearable. The reason lies in the way the human mind forms attachments and constructs emotional narratives. During a relationship, even a toxic or unstable one, there is a rhythm, a structure, and a sense of predictability, however flawed it may be. Your life adjusts to the presence of the other person. Their moods, their words, their patterns, even the ones that hurt you, become familiar. When the relationship ends, the sudden absence of this rhythm creates a vacuum, leaving not only an emotional void, but also a disruption in the internalized routines your mind has grown accustomed to. Your brain reacts to this void as if a critical part of your existence has been removed, triggering waves of grief that can feel overwhelming, confusing, and all-consuming. Another reason breakups feel more painful is tied to the collapse of hope and fantasy. Relationships are not just built on reality, they are built on imagined possibilities, the shared dreams, the what could be, and the visions of the future that were intertwined with the other person. When a relationship ends, these imagined futures vanish instantly, leaving behind a sense of loss that is often more profound than the loss of the person themselves. You are not just mourning who they were or what they did to you. You are mourning the life you thought you were building together, the version of yourself that existed within that imagined world. This is why breakups can trigger existential feelings of emptiness, disorientation, and self-doubt, making the pain feel larger than the sum of the experiences you shared. Breakups also force confrontation with uncomfortable truths that were often ignored during the relationship. While together, it is easier to justify, rationalize, or even overlook behaviors that cause discomfort. Distance and separation strip away these defenses, leaving you face to face with reality, both about the other person and about yourself. Suddenly, you see patterns of neglect, inconsistency, or incompatibility that you may have minimized before. Yet the emotional attachment remains, creating a painful dissonance between the reality of who the person was and the intensity of your lingering feelings. This dissonance fuels confusion, anger, and despair, amplifying the sense of hurt far beyond what you felt while you were together. Finally, breakups hurt more because they confront our deepest fears of abandonment and unworthiness. Even when a relationship was flawed, it offered a sense of connection, validation, and belonging. The moment it ends, those fundamental emotional needs feel threatened, triggering feelings of rejection, inadequacy, and loneliness. The mind struggles to reconcile the reality of loss with the desire for security, often magnifying every memory, every regret, and every what-if scenario. Emotional pain becomes intensified because it is no longer buffered by proximity or familiarity. The heart reacts as if it is under siege, and the psychological impact can be so profound that it feels almost unbearable, even when logically you know the breakup was necessary. Many people mistake emotional intensity for love, confusing the chaos of emotional addiction with the stability of genuine connection. Emotional addiction is a cycle fueled by highs and lows, where the thrill of uncertainty becomes intoxicating. It begins subtly, a harsh word followed by a sudden apology, a period of distance followed by overwhelming attention. Your brain responds to these swings with bursts of dopamine and adrenaline, teaching you that emotional volatility is exciting, even desirable. Over time, you begin to crave the chaos itself, believing that the emotional turbulence is proof of passion. You might justify hurtful behaviors by telling yourself that if love were real, it would always feel this intense. Emotional addiction thrives on unpredictability, on the push and pull of affection and withdrawal. It keeps you chasing someone who is inconsistent, confusing, or unavailable, mistaking emotional upheaval for intimacy and conflating dependency with desire. In contrast, emotional safety is the quiet, steady undercurrent that allows a relationship to flourish without constant turmoil. Emotional safety is not about the absence of passion or excitement. It is about the presence of trust, respect, and consistency. When you feel emotionally safe with someone, you do not fear expressing your vulnerabilities, asking for your needs to be met, or sharing your fears without judgment. You do not have to decode cryptic messages, anticipate their moods, or survive emotional manipulation. Emotional safety creates a foundation where intimacy can grow organically, where connection is chosen and nurtured rather than coerced or earned through cycles of pain. It is the space in a relationship where your mind and body can relax, where the highs are joyful and the lows are manageable, and where you feel secure enough to truly be yourself without shrinking or sacrificing your boundaries. The difference between emotional addiction and emotional safety is often subtle at first because human attachment systems are wired to respond to both extremes. Emotional addiction triggers a primal pull. It stimulates obsession, anxiety, and a constant preoccupation with the other person. Even after the relationship ends, the longing persists because the brain has been trained to equate instability with desire. Emotional safety, however, is grounding. It does not hijack your nervous system or create dependency. It encourages reflection, trust, and mutual respect. While emotional addiction feels urgent, consuming, and chaotic, emotional safety feels enduring, nurturing, and freeing. Recognizing the difference is not just a matter of intellect, it is a matter of felt experience, paying attention to how the relationship makes your mind, body, and heart respond over time. Many people remain trapped in emotional addiction because they mistake emotional intensity for connection, believing that the pain, jealousy, or drama are evidence of love. They might tolerate disrespect, instability, or emotional manipulation because it feels familiar, addictive, or exciting. Emotional safety, by contrast, requires clarity, self awareness, and the courage to prioritize long term well being over immediate gratification. It asks you to examine whether your emotional responses are being triggered by genuine connection or by patterns of craving and survival. Understanding this difference is crucial because it forms the foundation for healthy relationships. Without emotional safety, love becomes a roller coaster, a cycle of highs and lows that ultimately leaves your heart exhausted, even when you think you are in love. One of the most overlooked truths about relationships is that the pain we experience often mirrors the unresolved wounds within ourselves. Many people wonder why they are repeatedly drawn to partners who are emotionally unavailable, inconsistent, or even toxic. The answer is rarely external, it is internal. Our inner wounds, often rooted in childhood experiences, past heartbreaks, or deep seated feelings of unworthiness, act like magnets, attracting situations and people that resonate with that unresolved pain. When we are unaware of these wounds, we unconsciously seek out relationships that replicate familiar patterns, believing that enduring pain is part of love, or that fixing someone else will somehow heal us. The paradox is cruel. We chase relationships that exacerbate the very hurt we long to soothe, mistaking emotional turbulence for intimacy and validation. Healing begins not by changing others, but by confronting the hidden vulnerabilities within ourselves that draw us to harm. The first step in healing the inner wound is awareness. Most of the time, we move through life reacting rather than observing, swept along by emotions and old patterns without understanding their origins. We feel jealousy, fear, or anxiety in a relationship and blame the partner, the circumstances, or fate without ever questioning why these triggers are so potent. But these reactions are clues. They are echoes of unhealed pain, moments when the past silently dictates the present. Perhaps you grew up feeling overlooked, abandoned, or conditional love was the norm. Perhaps a past betrayal left an invisible scar that still dictates your expectations and behaviors in relationships today. Healing requires honesty, naming the wound, acknowledging its presence, and recognizing how it has shaped your choices. It is uncomfortable, but this discomfort is the gateway to freedom because the moment you understand the root of your attraction to pain, you gain the power to interrupt the cycle. Healing also demands compassion for oneself. Many people carry the inner wound with shame, believing that their repeated attraction to unhealthy relationships is a personal flaw or weakness. But the truth is that the wound is not your fault. It is a part of your human experience, a survival mechanism that once protected you in a different context. Treating yourself with kindness, patience, and understanding is essential to unlearning harmful patterns. Self-compassion allows you to witness your pain without judgment, to grieve unmet needs, and to soothe the parts of yourself that have been crying for recognition, love, and safety. When the inner wound is acknowledged and nurtured rather than ignored or suppressed, its magnetic pull over your relationships weakens. You begin to notice the difference between a partner who triggers your old pain and one who supports, honors, and uplifts you. Finally, healing the inner wound is an ongoing practice, not a one-time event. It involves creating boundaries, cultivating self-awareness, and choosing experiences that reinforce safety, connection, and authenticity. It may involve therapy, journaling, mindfulness, or honest conversations with yourself about your patterns and needs. Over time, the wound loses its power, and the choices you make in relationships shift from survival to alignment. As the inner work progresses, you no longer unconsciously chase pain disguised as love, but instead gravitate toward connections that nourish, respect, and sustain you, fostering a sense of wholeness that was once sought externally but is now cultivated from within. Detaching from someone you once loved is rarely simple, especially when the relationship has left scars, unmet expectations, or unresolved emotions. Most people assume that letting go requires anger, resentment, or a sense of finality fueled by bitterness, but true detachment is far more nuanced. It is a conscious act of reclaiming your emotional sovereignty without allowing past pain to poison your present or future. Bitterness keeps the heart chained to the memory of harm. Hatred reinforces a narrative that the other person holds power over your emotional state. Detaching without these toxic emotions requires cultivating clarity, compassion, and a deep understanding that separation does not have to be synonymous with malice. It begins with the realization that closure is internal, not external. You do not need apologies, explanations, or validation from someone who could not provide emotional safety to reclaim your peace. The moment you internalize that closure is a gift you give yourself, detachment becomes less about loss and more about liberation. A critical aspect of detaching without hatred is confronting your own emotional responses with honesty. It is natural to feel anger, sadness, or disappointment after the end of a relationship, but these emotions do not have to define your detachment. Instead of suppressing or overindulging in them, observe them as signals, indicators of unmet needs, boundaries crossed, or patterns repeated. When you see anger or resentment as a reflection of your own inner work rather than a weapon to wield against the other person, you reclaim agency over your feelings. This perspective allows you to honor your experiences without allowing them to turn into a narrative of revenge or self-pity. Bitterness often thrives on stories we tell ourselves about injustice and betrayal, exaggerating faults and replaying slights in the mind like a looping soundtrack. Detaching with consciousness involves interrupting this loop, choosing reflection over rumination, and refusing to anchor your identity in the harm you endured. Compassion plays an equally important role in this process. Detaching without hatred is not synonymous with condoning harmful behavior, but it involves recognizing the humanity of the other person, understanding that their limitations, choices, or inability to love you fully are not reflections of your worth. By reframing the narrative to see both yourself and the other person as human beings navigating life with imperfections, you dissolve the emotional fuel that sustains bitterness. Compassion softens the heart, creating space for empathy and acceptance, even while you firmly remove yourself from unhealthy dynamics. This balance between boundaries and understanding is essential because detachment without compassion can quickly tilt into coldness or cynicism, whereas detachment with compassion fosters inner freedom, dignity, and emotional clarity. Finally, detaching without hatred or bitterness requires a conscious commitment to your own growth and well being. It is about replacing obsession with reflection, resentment with acceptance, and pain with learning. It involves setting boundaries that protect your emotional space, cultivating practices that reinforce self love, and creating a vision of life where your happiness is not contingent upon someone else's behavior. When done consciously, detachment becomes an act of empowerment rather than surrender, a declaration that your peace, integrity, and emotional health are non negotiable, and that no past relationship, however intense or meaningful, has the right to compromise your sense of self. Building real love after experiencing trauma is one of the most challenging yet transformative journeys a person can undertake. Trauma in relationships, whether emotional, psychological, or relational, leaves invisible scars that shape how we view intimacy, trust, and connection. After such experiences, many people enter new relationships carrying fear, hypervigilance, and deep seated doubts about their worthiness of love. The first step in building real love after trauma is understanding that these responses are not weaknesses. They are protective mechanisms your mind and body develop to survive pain. Recognizing this allows you to approach new connections with self-awareness rather than avoidance or defensiveness. Real love does not require erasing the past. It requires integrating it into your understanding of yourself, knowing your triggers, boundaries, and emotional needs, and using that knowledge to create healthier relational patterns. Healing from trauma teaches that love cannot be built on fear, obligation, or emotional dependency. After trauma, many people unconsciously seek relationships that replicate familiar patterns, even if those patterns were harmful. Real love requires breaking this cycle by prioritizing emotional safety, mutual respect, and authenticity. It is about choosing a partner who does not trigger old wounds intentionally or inadvertently, but someone whose presence feels grounding rather than destabilizing. This kind of love encourages vulnerability without fear of judgment, allows for honest communication, and fosters a sense of partnership rather than power imbalance. Learning to identify these qualities in yourself and others is a crucial part of rebuilding the capacity to love fully and freely. Another key aspect of building real love after trauma is cultivating self-love and self-trust. Trauma often leaves people doubting their intuition, their needs, or their ability to choose well in relationships. By reconnecting with your inner voice, Acknowledging your emotions without shame and honoring your boundaries consistently, you strengthen your emotional resilience. Self love is not about perfection or isolation. It is about establishing a foundation where love is chosen from a place of wholeness rather than neediness or desperation. When you approach relationships from a position of self awareness and self respect, you naturally attract partners who are capable of reciprocating that level of care and integrity. Real love, in this sense, is both a reflection of and a continuation of the work you have done on yourself. Finally, building real love after trauma requires patience and trust in the process. It is easy to rush into relationships seeking reassurance, intimacy, or validation, but these impulses often lead to repeating past patterns. Real love develops over time through consistent actions, mutual understanding, and a willingness to navigate challenges together without resorting to manipulation, avoidance, or emotional volatility. It involves recognizing that a partner is not there to complete you, but to walk alongside you as a whole, grounded individual. Real love is a practice of showing up for yourself, for your partner, and for the shared growth of the relationship. It is built not in moments of intensity alone, but in the quiet choices that demonstrate respect, trust, and care on a daily basis. Healing from heartbreak and trauma is not a linear journey, nor is it a path defined by perfection. It is messy, painful, and deeply transformative. The patterns that once held you captive, the trauma bonds, the emotional addictions, the unresolved wounds are not your failures. They are signals guiding you toward awareness, growth, and self love. Every step you take to understand why you stayed, why you hurt, and why you crave connection is a step toward reclaiming your power and rewriting your story. Detaching without hatred, learning to recognize emotional safety, and discerning what real love looks like are not just lessons for relationships, they are lessons for life itself. They teach you to honor your needs, set boundaries, and embrace the kind of love that nurtures rather than diminishes you. They remind you that your worth is inherent, not conditional on someone else's attention, affection, or validation. Building real love after trauma is not about forgetting the past. It is about integrating it, learning from it, and stepping forward with clarity and courage. It is about choosing partners who elevate your life rather than trigger your fears, and about creating a connection that is rooted in trust, compassion, and mutual respect. Most importantly, it is about cultivating a love for yourself that no heartbreak can ever take away. As you move through the process of healing, remember that every scar, every tear, and every difficult lesson has shaped you into someone capable of recognizing, receiving, and sustaining true love. Real love begins not when someone else shows up for you, but when you show up fully for yourself, unafraid, unapologetic, and whole.